Welcome to all. So, in last lecture, we have studied the final drives. Okay, so we have started the simple Hotchkiss drive and talk to drive. That topic we have covered in this lecture. So, you have to see this diagram, right? The simple propeller shaft is connected to the two universal joint and also a sliding joint, right? Then the other the other point is connected to your differential, right? But in between the your propeller shaft and differential, a Hotchkiss drive is used for the suspension of your vehicle. Okay, so in this suspension of vehicle, simple, we have used a lip spring. One end of lip spring is connected to frame and other is shackled to your frame, right? Then simple Hotchkiss drive. The Hotchkiss drive is simplest and most popular form of rear axle suspension. Hotchkiss drive combines the springing and positioning or locating of the rear axle, right? It uses a rigid axle with lip spring mounted at its extremities as far apart as possible on the rear axle. So, in this Hotchkiss drive consists of lip spring and propeller shaft with two universal joints and one slip joint. Then the front end of the lip spring with pivoted in pin of bracket which is bolted to the vehicle frame, right? One end of lip spring is bolted to your frame, then or fixed to the frame, while rear end of lip spring is supported in swinging shackle with anti-friction bush material, right? And other end of lip spring is connected to the shackle. The lip springs are bolted rigidly to the rear axle casing at middle. The spring takes weight of body, torque, reaction and driving thrust. Then the driving and braking torques are absorbed through the front half of the rear lip spring shown by dotted. You have to see in this diagram, right? The dotted line is for the driving torque and braking torque are absorbed through the front half of the rear lip spring. During the driving and braking, the bevel pinion changes the position, so the length and angle of propeller shaft changes, which will be adjusted by universal joint and sliding joint. Therefore, if only one universal joint is at the front end, then the propeller shaft may bend or damage. To avoid this, another universal joint is provided at rear end. When the vehicle comes across a bump or shocks, the rear axle moves up and down, and it has to move in a circle with front spring supported at the frame as center. Okay, during this movement, the rear axle, the length of the propeller shaft changes, which will be adjusted by sliding joint, right? की आपण त्याला slip joint म्हणतो. Then you have to see in this diagram a simple Hotchkiss drive, right? A shackle or one end of shackle and other end of is fixed to the frame, right? So that's why the braking torque and driving torque are the absorbed. Okay, so the next is torque tube drive. Okay, so in this you have to see that a simple torque tube are used in this propeller shaft, right? When you have to use a torque tube like propeller shaft, that time a simple drive is used in this, right? So torque tube drive is used in torque drive. The propeller shaft is enclosed in a hollow tube. जो टॉर्क ट्यूब ड्राईव्ह आहे तो प्रॉपेलर शाफ्टमध्ये काय आहे एनक्लोज केलेला आहे हॉलो ट्यूबमध्ये. ओके. द ट्यूब इज रिजिडली बोल्टेड टू द डिफरेन्शियल हाउसिंग राईट at one end and is fastened at the other end to the transmission through a somewhat flexible joint situated in spherical cup fixed to the frame. The torque reaction and driving thrust are taken up by torque tube. When the vehicle comes across a bump or shocks, the center line of the bevel pinion shaft will not be shifted and always passes through the center of a spherical cup. Okay. Then hence only one universal joint is required at front end. Only one universal joint is required at front end and no universal joint at the rear end. But we have to see in the Hotchkiss drive there are two universal joint we have to use. Okay. The torque tube incorporate bearing which supports the propeller shaft. It is usually located between gearbox and the propeller shaft. Right. जो टॉर्क ट्यूब ड्राईव्ह आहे राईट तो तुमच्या गेअरबॉक्स अँड प्रॉपेलर शाफ्टच्या मध्ये असतो राईट. नो स्लायडिंग जॉईंट इज रिक्वायर्ड इन प्रॉपेलर शाफ्ट राईट. आपण प्रॉपेलर शाफ्टमध्ये बघितलं की तुम्हाला स्लायडिंग जॉईंट किंवा स्लिप जॉईंट असतो प्रत्येकामध्ये, पण टॉर्क ट्यूब ड्राईव्ह याच्यामध्ये स्लायडिंग जॉईंट किंवा स्लिप जॉईंटची गरज नसते. In this drive, the lip spring takes only the side thrust besides supporting weight of the body. Okay. Then you have to see that a simple torque tube drive. Okay. बघा तुम्हाला एका साईडला प्रॉपेलर शाफ्ट दिसेल, एका साईडला तुमचा प्रॉपेलर शाफ्ट आहे, त्याच्यानंतर इथं टॉर्क ट्यूब आहे राईट, आणि तो प्रॉपेलर शाफ्ट तुमचा कनेक्टेड आहे या साईडला तुमच्या डिफरेन्शियलला. ओके. सो दॅट इज सिम्पल हॉचकिस ड्राईव्ह अँड टॉर्क ट्यूब ड्राईव्ह राईट. ओके. सो यू हॅव टू सी द कंपॅरिझन बिटवीन द torque tube drive and Hotchkiss drive. In this Hotchkiss drive you have to see that two universal joint are used, right? But in a torque tube drive there is only one universal joint are used, and in Hotchkiss drive there is a one slip joint is needed, but in torque tube drive there is no need of slip joint, right? And also simple in a torque tube drive or in a Hotchkiss drive, right? There is a simple comparison in between this, right? So that is simple covering our lecture. Okay. So that is the end of our lecture.